My name is Bruce Jennings. I've been involved in Marshall County since I was born at Argos, and I now am in Bremen. So I've been in Bremen High School for 40 years, and I grew up in Argos, graduating in 1974. The only time I went away from Marshall County was when I went to college, University of Indianapolis, for 4 years.
So let's, one of the things I kind of like to figure out with the interviewees is kind of how they developed the passion for the sport that they played in high school. So let's kind of go back to your childhood.
Okay.
Where did you grow up? And tell me a little bit about your family.
Nick, I grew up in Argos. I'm the second son of 5 boys, John and Joy Jennings, on a rural dairy farm 3 miles east of Argos. My mom and dad still live there. My dad, of course, had us doing chores, farm chores. That was a big part of our life, baling hay and feeding the animals. But he put a priority on education. I'm so blessed that my mom and dad valued education. And so we put in a lot of hours, all 5 of us boys, at school, whether it be in music, the arts, sports, and Mom and Dad emphasized that that was a priority. When I grew up, we played in barns, played basketball. That was my passion. But I played soccer. I ran cross country 1 year. I played baseball and track simultaneously. Ended up with 15 varsity letters, which at that time was a record at Bremen High School, at Argos High School. But when I grew up, we played in barns. We'd have the Worsler barn primarily. It was a full court up in the haymow. It was about a mile away from my house, so I'd dribble the basketball to the barn and from the barn every day. And I lived in that barn. That was my hobby. But there were other barns too. The Edmonds family, the Matheny barn, the Graber barn, the Jennings barn. We just played barn ball, and it was awesome. I had a great time doing that. We'd just call each other and say, meet me at the barn at such and such time. Of course, we didn't have cell phones at that time. We couldn't text at that time. It'd be much easier for this generation to get together and play barn ball and organize those events, but they don't want to play barn ball. Nowadays, they have to have a hardwood floor, and even then, it's tough to get kids in the gym to play anymore, but that was our passion back then, playing basketball.
Tell me a little bit about, kind of describe the kind of the sights and the sounds and the smells of playing in the barn. What was that like?
Yeah, it's interesting. You'd crawl up in the middle of the court. Off to one side was the hole that we crawled up into the haymow. And then even during the cold weather, we'd play up there and we'd surround the court with straw and hay to keep it warm. You could smell the manure, and every once in a while somebody'd get an elbow and get tossed down, fall down the hole. But we always had a big stack of straw or hay to land in. And there were several guys that landed down on the straw through the hole after a nice foul that somebody made, probably intentional. But the court was just big enough so you could rebound at one end and shoot about a 25-foot shot to the other basket at the other end, rebound, turn around and shoot at the other basket. So that's how everybody developed their long-range shooting, even though the three-point line wasn't around at that time.
So who were some of the guys that you would be there?
They were big families. I mean, the Edmonds boys, they had multiple kids too, multiple boys. C.J. Worsler, that was his host site, the barn at C.J.'s place. And in fact, C.J. now lives in North Carolina, and he replicated that barn. It looks exactly like it did.
That's amazing.
To the backboard, the paint, everything. It's impressive down in North Carolina. But there were just a lot of families, the Grabers, and just a lot of families at Harleys that we grew up with in the country, and we'd all just show up on our bicycles or mopeds.
So for him to recreate that barn, that had to have been a pretty indelible memory for him to want to do that, right?
Yeah, it's a much nicer, cleaner barn. I mean, he has weddings there, he hosts parties there, but he made it intentionally look just like the barn out in the country, about 4 miles east of Argos.
So what do you think growing up playing barn ball did for your athletic time in high school?
I tell today's coaches, I said the best way to learn how to play basketball, in my opinion, is 3-on-3 basketball. Because it's rugged, you get a lot of ball handling skills, you get the pick and roll, you have to learn how to box out, and you bang each other. I mean, it's physical. 3-on-3 basketball is the best way to learn, and that's what we did. A lot of 3-on-3 basketball.
Because everybody has to do a little bit of everything. Right?
Yeah, in close quarters. I mean, the barn wasn't full court size, so you can't spread out and everybody shoot threes. No, you had to bang inside, and sometimes you got banged off the wall. So the physicality was really what made you tough.
So that probably translated to, like, a lot of the gyms were a lot smaller back then too, with the seats like right close to the court. Do you think that?
Yeah. In fact, I remember playing in the Bremen gym when I was a senior, and they still had the double center line. And if our students today saw the double center line, they wouldn't know what that is. We'd have to explain and try and help them understand that rule. But the double center line used to exist on a lot of courts because they were smaller.
Now that was where you had 10 seconds to get to one line, right?
And then you couldn't return to past the farthest line once you got over that. Yeah.
I did hear somebody talk about that the other day, and I was like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's quite a bit different.
And there are some great gyms. I mean, Akron. I used to love playing in the Akron gym. Talma gym, Mentone gym. Back when before the consolidations, those gyms still existed, and maybe some of them still do. On weekends, once we got our driver's license back then, we didn't have access to hardwood floors like they have open gyms now. So we had to break into gyms. And the easiest gym in Marshall County to break in was the Tyner gym. Tyner's now part of John Glenn, and that school no longer exists. It's been torn down. But we used to send one guy through the coal bin, and that guy had to take off his shoes and go barefoot over the coal, come up and unlock the door for us, and then we'd all play basketball in the Tyner gym, the easiest gym in Marshall County to break in.
That's great. Yeah, it's funny because the old gym in Bourbon is still up.
Yeah.
And when I was in junior high, we used to send somebody through the window.
Oh yeah.
And they'd have to kind of squeeze through there. Usually the smallest guy, and he'd get in and come in a lot.
Oh yeah, we went through the window in Tippecanoe. We went through the window in Bourbon. There were a lot of places where we snuck into gyms because otherwise we didn't have access. That was a luxury. That was paradise when we got into a gym on a hardwood floor. Otherwise, it was barn ball.
So, I mean, that must have been, you had that, your group of friends had that desire to play basketball pretty, where do you think that came from? Where was that?
Well, my dad loved basketball, so he instilled that in us, and everybody had a hoop. And that's still pretty true. There's a lot of driveway hoops now, but you don't see the barn ball hoops anymore. And when we started putting up backboards and hoops and barns, kids just were attracted. Of course, we didn't have cell phones back then. We weren't doing FaceTime, looking at YouTube. We wanted to play and have some physical activity, and that's what we did.
Yeah, seems like it was a good outlet for a lot of kids.
Oh yeah.
So let's go through. Let's walk through your school years. You went to Argos Elementary School. Anything you remember about school at an elementary school?
Oh, I do.
Stands out to you?
Argos was a great school experience for me all the way through, and I fell in love with school. I had great experience all the way through, and that's probably why I'm still an educator, being 40 years at Bremen High School now, the last 12 years as the principal. I have fond memories of Argos Elementary School, and one in particular, Ruby. Ruby was our matron, our custodian. And one day I remember I was allowed to go to the restroom. And my teacher said, okay, you can go to the restroom, just get back real soon. Well, I found myself alone in the restroom, so I decided to hang upside down and make monkey sounds from the bar above the stall. Well, I was making monkey sounds thinking I was all by myself, and all of a sudden Ruby busts through the door and she gets me down, pats me on the bottom, spanks me one swat, and says, Bruce, you get back to class. And I was so scared that Ruby knew my name. Not only did she come into a male restroom, and she was a female, and she looked about 80 years old at that time, but Ruby knew my name, and she was going to call my mom. And that changed my life, because Ruby taught me that when you think you're alone, you're really not alone. No matter if you're 1,000 miles away on vacation in some hotel somewhere, Ruby could bust through that door at any moment. So it was a life-changing moment for me. Then about 15, 20 years later, Ruby, I saw her in an Argos game. In fact, it was the last game that Argos played Plymouth at Argos. And it was packed. And I saw Ruby sitting on the deck, and I snuck up behind her and kissed her on the cheek. She turned around, stood up, and said, Bruce, I never missed a game you played in. And we stood and hugged for a while. And that was the custodian of Argos Elementary School. And what a difference she made in my life.
Yeah, that's a great story. She probably heard the monkey sounds, right?
Oh, yeah. And then in high school, I was involved in band and swing choir and FFA. And what a great opportunity to just get involved in more than just sports. And that's the beauty of a small school. And I find that to be true at Bremen, too. The kids can get involved in multiple things and excel and grow as leaders. And I think that's so important to develop leadership skills in our kids by giving them some diversity, some great experiences, in addition to athletics.
Yeah, definitely. So let's, as your group is kind of going through elementary school and into junior high, you guys are starting to play together in all the sports and get teams. Who were some of the guys that you played with that you knew that were going to be with you for the rest of the high school there?
Well, some guys that are still in Marshall County. Mike Burrows was a good athlete for us, played soccer and ran track and basketball with me, and we were good friends. He stood up in my wedding and sang in my wedding, and so I love Mike. Devon Shear no longer lives in Marshall County, but he lives down in Hamilton County, close to Indianapolis. Very successful businessman, but he was a great athlete in the class of 1974 as well. So we had some good athletes that played multiple sports, but it's not like today where athletes specialize in one sport, maybe two at the most. We played everything, and we went from sport to sport. In fact, I played track and basketball in high school simultaneously in the same season, and rarely went to practice for either one. I'd go to the track meets, go to the baseball games, and it was great. I felt like a pro.
So did you have a sport that you loved the most?
No question, I love basketball the most, but I will tell you this, soccer prepared us well for basketball. Not only was the players were the same in soccer and basketball, and we learned to pass the ball to each other, whether passing the ball with our feet or passing the ball with our hands. it was the same principle, and a lot of good teamwork. We knew each other. The chemistry was fantastic. We grew up K to 12 with each other. We played all the same sports together. That was what made Argos sports really strong. My senior year, we won the state championship for the first time in soccer in 1973. That was the fall of '73. And we played New Albany in the final game. In the unofficial state championship game, we beat New Albany 1-0. And that was a memory I'll never forget.
So walk me through that season, actually. Okay, so going into your senior season, what expectations did you have for the soccer team that year? Like, what did you know that you guys had a chance to?
Yeah, we ran the season. Back then, we only played, I think, 14 games, and we were undefeated all the way through. We were strong. We were able to score a lot of goals. We didn't have a whole lot of finesse as soccer players like they do now. There's really good ball handlers now in soccer, girls and boys. But we were very physical. And sometimes we didn't even wear the shin guards. We'd roll our socks down and expose our shins. Kind of a macho thing, kind of showing the other team that come at us. We don't care. The soccer field was so worn that we hardly had grass, at least in the penalty box areas, because the soccer field was used for physical education classes and practice every day. We didn't have a field reserved just for the games. And now the facility down at Argos is beautiful, and grass like a golf course. But we didn't have that back then. There were a lot of stones. So if you did not come out of practice or a game with we called them strawberries on your hips or knees, you were called all kinds of names in the locker room by your teammates. So it was expected to have some strawberries on your hips, which means a little blood, from slide tackling people in soccer on dirt, not on grass.
So I talked to Coach Snyder. Tell me a little bit about playing for him.
Yeah, I played soccer for Pooch, and I also played basketball for Pooch Snyder. He was my basketball coach when I was a sophomore and junior on the varsity, and then Phil Weybright took over my senior year, and that was Phil's first year as a varsity coach. It was my senior year in 1974. Ed Miller was also an assistant soccer coach with Pooch, and very fond memories. Those guys were just motivators. I don't know that Pooch knew a whole lot about soccer technique and strategy. He just inspired us, motivated us, and pumped us up with his Newt Rockney type of style. And we were ready to play every game, and we played hard every game. And Pooch Snyder was the motivator.
He told me that I interviewed him a couple of weeks, actually months ago, I guess. Now.
Yeah.
He said that he didn't know anything about soccer.
Yeah.
But he knew how to get the kids going.
Yeah.
So sometimes that's all you need.
That's correct. Yeah.
So you're getting ready for that season, and kind of walk me through after the season's over and you're getting ready for the playoffs. Like what was the feeling on the team, and do you remember who you played leading up to that?
I don't remember the actual schedule who we played, but I do know that we played the state championship game at Culver Academy. So New Albany came all the way up from the river, the Ohio River, and they came all the way up to play us at Culver Academy. I do remember traveling to Park Tudor. We played Park Tudor in Indianapolis that year. So we had some road trips. I do remember, I think we played Lallemure. Westview was a public school that had soccer at that time, but most of the schools we played were private schools.
So is there a little extra motivation in playing, private schools as compared to a public school?
We were motivated to play no matter who we played. Now I will say the guys from Westview, which grew up in Mennonite Amish territory, those guys were equally as hardworking and equally as motivated as we were. So that was a healthy rivalry playing Westview. We always enjoyed going over there because they played just like we did.
So you get to the New Albany game, unofficial, right?
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have necessarily.
Yeah, the IHSA had not adopted soccer as an official sport at that time.
So what do you remember about the last game there?
It was 0-0 for a long time, and I do remember, I think it was Deanie Zentz, I think, that scored the winning goal, and I got the assist, as I recall, but I may be wrong there. Don't quote me on that.
Don't worry.
What else can I add about soccer? I think one thing that's very important to point out, though, is the onslaught of girls' athletics. Prior to the 1972 year, I believe it was nothing more than GAA, Girls Athletic Association, which was club sports. And I don't even know if they played other schools. I think it was all within the school that had GAA. And then in 1971, I believe it was Senator Birch Bayh who authored a bill in Congress, the Title IX extension of the Civil Rights Amendment. And at that time, gender was not discriminated against by facility, by sport. So schools were forced to have girls' athletics and girls' facilities equal to the guys. So Title IX made a huge difference in the 1970s when I grew up. So Argos started having volleyball, and Argos started having a basketball team for the girls, and those things slowly evolved. And so in the 1980s, girls basketball really started coming on strong. And that's when I was at Bremen. And Bremen kind of got a jump start on girls athletics. And I thought for the 1980s, we were really strong at Bremen and ahead of the game in girls athletics.
How did that happen?
I'm not sure how it happened. I think the school just decided to dive right in and bring on the girls. And on the other hand, on the flip side of that, it kind of hurt the extracurricular programs like the arts, the choirs, and the band enrollment dropped because girls said, I'm gonna play sports. I'm gonna have to quit the band. So there was some of that going on, but girls athletics, and when girls started playing basketball, there were so many jump balls, it was unbelievable because girls didn't know how to pivot. And so they'd get wrapped up and they'd grab the ball and have a jump ball after jump ball after jump ball. And now you don't see that. You see some talented female basketball players, and the jump balls have declined tremendously. But that all happened in the 1970s when I was a student at Argos. Title IX came about, and I'm so glad it did because it's so fun watching girls' athletics now. In fact, my niece is a starting point guard on Butler University team this year. My grandparents go to about every game they can, and she's still playing in the NIT. Tonight, she plays at Cincinnati. So we're excited to watch Whitney play. That's my brother Doug's daughter, and fantastic player. She was
quite the career.
She was Miss Basketball at Logansport when she was in high school. Went to Iowa 2 years, transferred to Butler, and now is finishing up at Butler. So I'm so glad that girls' athletics came on strong.
Yeah, it's too bad he couldn't get her to play for Argos, huh?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, we've had a couple of female coaches come in who were coaching during that transition, where from the GAA
sure.
to
yeah.
And it's been interesting to hear some of those stories.
Yeah.
It's an interesting time, and you wouldn't think it would have been that pronounced, the difference in resources for, but kind of makes sense at different times.
Yeah, now we even have to look at the schedules. Girls' athletic schedule, boys' athletic schedule. The boys used to get prime time. Basketball games were on Friday, Saturday. Now we have to mix it up. Sometimes the boys have to play during the week and get their homework done after the game. That's what the girls did for a long time, until athletic directors realized they were violating Title IX because the boys always got prime time. And now the girls get to play on Friday, Saturday nights sometimes too. It's kind of cool.
Yeah. So, so the championship for the Argos soccer. Now, Argos soccer went on to develop quite the reputation in the state. Do you think that championship kind of, gave the program more momentum, or had they won before? I can't.
They had not won the state championship prior to 1973. I'm not sure when the state championship tournament actually took place. I think how it was done was there was a North champion and a South champion, and they played each other. We happened to be, in 1973, the North champion. We had to go through Culver Academy, and New Albany must have been the Southern champion. We played each other. Culver Academy always had a strong team, and with different nationalities represented. Kids came from all over the world, and it was always fun playing them because they talked different languages, and we had no idea what they were saying. So we'd try and learn a little bit of Spanish at least going into those games so we could hear what they were saying. It didn't work. It was like incognito. They were talking a foreign language the whole time we were playing practically. And they were always more skilled than we were, great ball handlers coming from European countries and South American countries. And we were just a bunch of farm boys trying to play rugged soccer.
Must have worked though.
Yeah, it worked. Yeah, we were very physical.
So that, would you say that championship or that success helped propel the program on to where it went?
Well, I think our championship in 1973 probably not only propelled the soccer program, but also propelled the basketball program. As I said before, developing strong legs and jumping ability and teamwork and passing skills in soccer helped our basketball skills as well. And I think several years later that proved to be true when Argos's basketball team had a nice run to the state championship.
Yeah. So let's talk about basketball a little bit then. So you said, let's start with your freshman year. What do you remember about? Actually, let's start off kind of wider. What was basketball? What was high school basketball like back? When you started playing, like what was the feeling in the community and
When I played basketball, there were still some schools that had not yet consolidated. LaVille had, Triton had, but Mentone, Talma, and Akron were still separate schools. Tippecanoe Valley had not formed yet. So that was interesting. I do remember my senior year, Rochester had a very good team. We didn't play them in regular season, but Neil Beemendorfer was a 7-foot player, and they went undefeated in their regular season, but lost to Akron in the sectional championship. So that was a huge upset, and little Akron beat Rochester with a solid team. Neil went on to play at Vanderbilt University and is now an attorney somewhere, I think down in Tennessee. Basketball in high school was a lot of fun, and I played JV basketball when I was a freshman under Phil Weybright. Phil was my JV coach as a freshman, and then he became my varsity coach when I was a senior. I played the other 2 years, sophomore and junior year, with Pooch Snyder. Phil was a fantastic coach. Never got upset. At least the players didn't think he got upset. He might have hit a locker or something in private, but I never saw Phil raise his voice. He was a great role model for us. He played with us in practice. He was a great player, and we wanted to emulate him. We wanted to be like Phil Weybright. Back then, we didn't have a Michael Jordan, and so we didn't say be like Mike. We said we want to be like Phil, and he was great for us.
So that let's talk about your senior year then. How did you guys do that year?
I think we were 12-8 my senior year, maybe 14-8. I do remember playing the bi-county tournament, and we were playing the championship game against LaVille. And on that LaVille team was Mike Lightfoot, my good friend now, longtime Bethel College coach. We still trash talk each other. He tells me I can't shoot. I tell him he can't play defense. But LaVille beat us. And Mike Lightfoot guarded me and held me to my season low point total, which was 15. That was my lowest game that senior year. And then they turned around and beat us again, I think 2 weeks later in the regular season game at Argos. So yeah, that was a little rough to get beat by LaVille twice. And my buddy Mike Lightfoot rubs that in once in a while.
Who were your big rivals then playing during basketball season? Who did you get a little extra?
Well, I think all the county schools. Argos never got to play Plymouth in the regular season back then, but we enjoyed playing Triton. Triton had a really good team when I was a sophomore. Rich Rhodes, Mel Trowbridge, Sharp. They were really, really good. Outstanding team. Of course, Bruce Grimm was in the area at that time. Bruce transferred from Triton to Rochester to Plymouth. I don't think he'd be able to do that in today's society with the IHSA governing those transfers. But back then, he played for 3 different high schools, and I got to play against him quite often. We were good friends, though. We played independent ball after we graduated together, and so I got to play a lot with Bruce Grimm. Bruce Dayhuff at John Glenn, outstanding player, played for, I think, North Carolina State. In fact, he might have played for a national championship team at North Carolina State.
The one that won on the last second shot?
I think maybe.
Wow.
He played with Monty Tao out of Converse, Indiana, and don't quote me on that, but I think that might be true. But Bruce was a really classy player, great shooter. So we enjoyed playing the rivalry schools. All the schools were rivals. And in fact, I was student council president, I believe, back in 1974 when we developed the bell that is interchangeable between Culver and Argos even today. And we came up with that idea jointly with the student council from Culver, and there's a bell that gets passed back and forth, I believe, between Argos and Culver, whoever wins that basketball game.
Any big games stand out to you from your?
Well, other than the bi-county game, of course, everybody wants to win the sectional. We played our sectional in Plymouth, and back then I played against my good buddies at Mark Hayden from Plymouth, Bobby Girton. Those guys, I played ball every weekend with those guys up in Plymouth. Well, no, we couldn't get in the gyms. Remember, we either had to go to a barn or we had to go to a driveway. So we'd go to Bobby Girton's house. Well, it was right by, we'd always play basketball right at Mark Hayden's driveway area. And Bobby would show up, and so we'd have Plymouth versus Argos rivalry right there in driveway ball. Yeah, it's a good time. But I do remember we had a 10-point lead against Plymouth in the sectional, maybe a 12-point lead at halftime, and we blew it. And we got beat by 3 points, I believe, by Plymouth in the final game. And you know, when your high school career is over, you never forget the last few minutes of the game. And I made a over and back violation with about 30 seconds left in the game. we had set up a play where I was supposed to get the ball on a sideline out of bounds play, and I was supposed to come from the opposite corner off a screen and get the ball and then get it back to the guard so we could get the play set up. Well, I tossed the ball, long story short, over the 10-second line because all I could think about was getting the ball to the guard. And so I got the ball to the guard in the wrong place. Violation, Plymouth got the ball, and we never took the lead in the second half at all. So that was rough, a rough loss.
Was that the year that they won? Went down to semi-state?
No. That would have been 1980. My little brothers played against Plymouth. In fact, my brother Scott played against Plymouth in what year did they go down there and win the state? 81?
I think it was
80?
81, 82 season, yeah.
My brother Scott's Argos team was very good. My brother Doug's Argos team, 2 years prior to that, was even better. They went all the way to the Final Four, getting beat by Anderson. But when Scott was playing in the sectional against Scott Skiles' team, they had a nice lead and almost beat Plymouth. Had they beaten Plymouth, the future of Scott Skiles might have changed a lot because nobody would have recognized him. I doubt if he would have got the Michigan State scholarship, and I doubt if he would have signed that pro contract had little Argos beat Plymouth in that sectional final game.
So close.
It was close.
Yeah. So Argos basketball had in one of the stories that we're gonna do, like a more focused story is on that 79 team.
Mm-hmm.
But they had an incredible run for what was it, 3 or 4 years where they were undefeated. I mean, what was it about Argos basketball at that time that was just so incredible? What do you think? How do you think that happened?
Well, at that time, I was a teacher. I had graduated from the University of Indianapolis, where I played a little bit of basketball. And my brother Doug was on that team. He was the leading scorer on that team. He was a junior at the time with the Odell brothers and the Malone brothers. And yeah, they had some brother combinations that were really good. And that was a key to that team, I think. They had some clones of each other that played on that team. And it wasn't just one single player, it was a total team effort. But they had a run of how many games in a row did Argos win? Regular season, 74, 76 games in a row they won. It was pretty impressive, and Phil Weybright was instrumental in that. I remember how the media just flocked to Argos, just came to Argos, and I remember my little brother Brian was very little at the time, and he got out of the car at the stoplight downtown Argos, and we had him dribble the basketball across the street just so he could get on TV because the TV cameras were everywhere. And he did. He got on TV dribbling the basketball across the street, so we kind of staged that, knowing that would happen. But Argos might have had a little bit of a disadvantage because that state final game against Anderson occurred at the end of their spring break. I still think that had they had a routine and not been bombarded by the media during that week of spring break, they might have done a lot better against Anderson and made it all the way to the final game. But they got beat in the semifinal.
Phil talked about that a little bit too.
Yeah.
They had a rhythm down and
Yeah.
it just got a little interrupted and he was a little distracted and all that stuff. But
Yeah. Ironically, the two leading scorers in that game, the leading scorer for Anderson, Pat Skaggs, and the leading scorer for Argos, Doug Jennings, ended up going to college together and playing college ball together at University of Indianapolis. And now they're good friends, both living in Logansport. Pat Skaggs is the coach of the Logansport high school team, where Doug's kids went and played for Pat Skaggs. So it's pretty amazing, that story between Anderson and Argos, and how it created a lifelong bond between two young men that eventually, basketball was how they met.
That's pretty cool.
And how they stayed together.
Yeah. So what do you remember from that '79 season? Were you down at the game?
Oh, I was at I was at the game.
Tell me a little bit about kind of the atmosphere.
Yeah. Oh, everybody in Argos was there, and I think that was a given. Last guy out of town, turn off the lights. But that was a special moment, not only for my family, but for the whole community. I think when you have that kind of an event happen, it just brings everybody together.
A lot of people have talked about, all the signs in the windows and the caravans of people down to the game, and how it just really brought the community together around.
Yeah. And then the season continued next year. They were undefeated the next year and got beat by Warsaw, I believe, in the final game of the regional at Elkhart. And that was a heartbreaking ending because my brother Doug missed 2 free throws right at the end of the game with no time left on the clock. Had he made 1 free throw, it would have put him into overtime, I believe. Had he made both free throws, they would have won the game and advanced again to the semi-state. And Doug, at that time, the next week, this is his senior year now, so the next week was his spring break. He was so devastated. That's how he ended his high school career, as the all-time leading scorer at Argos, but he ended it as a failure in his mind. He didn't come out of his room the whole spring break. He was devastated. But then he went on to play for Billy Keller at the University of Indianapolis, had a stellar career at the University of Indianapolis, and now he's a doctor. So all turned out well. The sun came up the next day, but he and I both have something in common. Our last game of our high school career was miserable, a miserable ending. And that's one thing about Hoosier hysteria, is there's not many kids that end their last game on a high note. Scott Skiles did it. There are a few. But most of us end what we worked so hard for by losing. But so much can be learned from a loss as well.
So that's got to be a memory that sticks with you, clearly.
Mm-hmm.
But life goes on.
Yeah,
right?
life goes on. Yeah. And most of the people I know that have experienced a sectional loss in basketball have gone on to have successful lives.
Mm-hmm. What do you think it is about sports that kind of just sticks into people's brains like that?
Well, I think a lot of it goes into the hard work you prepare for your sport, and then if it's not successful in your mind, you're going to remember that forever. Or if it is successful, you're going to remember that forever. But I think it's the hard work and the preparation that goes into it for the moment. You're going to remember those moments.
Yeah. And they definitely leave an impression in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Yes, they do.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the football.
Sure.
At Bremen, and what it means to the community, and
sure.
How Don was at
sure.
Force.
I came to Bremen High School in 1979. So my first graduating class I experienced was 1980. I came from Knox 1 year. I taught at Knox right out of college, University of Indianapolis. I met Don Bunge on day 1. He was a biology teacher. I was a chemistry teacher. We had rooms right next door to each other. And at lunchtime, I packed my lunch that day on day 1. And Don Bunge came to my room and said, "Bruce, what are you doing for lunch?" I said, "Well, I was just going to eat my lunch here in the room." He goes, "Nope, you come with me. We're going to have lunch down in the locker room. That's where I always eat. Some of the other guys are down there too." So I said, all right. So I packed up my lunch, walked down to the locker room, football locker room with Don. It was football season. So some of his fellow coaches were there. Fritz Niersty, whom the track is named after, the legendary Fritz Niersty. He was the track coach, cross-country coach. coached a lot of different things. So did Don. And Don Bunge was there, of course, and Judd Robinette, who was a legend in his time as well. And those guys started telling stories, and all I did was listen and laugh. And I did that my whole first year of teaching at Bremen in 1979-80. I listened and laughed to Don Bunge's stories, Judd Robinette's stories, and Fritz Nierste's stories. And now I find myself telling those stories. I am the historian of Bremen High School, and people ask me about the history of the school, the football program, and I've heard some stories that I can't retell, locker room talk, but I've heard a lot of heartwarming stories as well. Don Bunge was a special guy. I mean, he still is to me, still a good friend. I pick him up for every football game on the road. We travel together to this day. In fact, the last game of the year this year, Don said, "Bruce, this will probably be my last road trip." I go, no. You've got 5 more years, 10 more years. You might outlast me, Bung. So he laughed, and I dropped him off, and he got out, and I got his walker out, and he walked up to his house and thanked me again and again for taking him to the football games. But the guy goes to every practice. He is either picked up in a golf cart by one of the managers, or he gets dropped off by a family member, and he goes to every practice, football practice. And the kids just love having him there. He is a legend. He truly is.
He's an institution there, and named the field after him. And
yeah. Last year, not this past fall, but the fall before this, in 2017, I took him with me to the Bluffton game, which was a sectional game at Bluffton, the final game of the season. We got beat, and on the way home, we were commiserating about the game, but when he got home that night, he found out that his wife had died. Jan had passed away. And so he's been kind of devastated by that. But his son, Jay Bunge, still lives with him. And so I'm glad he has somebody to take care of him. He still lives in the same house that he built right there in Bremen. And he built the football field. He truly did. He's an amazing guy.
Yeah. He was telling me a little bit about how they brought in some farmers and to plant the seed. There was nothing there, and he built it up from. Guess they got some seeding from Notre Dame.
Yeah.
They borrowed some of that stands from them. So
Don Bunge had an excellent career at University of Indianapolis too. Not too many people know that he was a 3-sport athlete there, maybe more than that. He might have played 4 sports, but he still tries to get to the University of Indianapolis football games on weekends. And we've got a player down there right now named Ryan Topper. He loves going to see Ryan play. So yeah, he's a big fan of the Greyhounds of Indianapolis.
He's in the Hall of Fame down there. Right?
He is. He's a Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
Don came all the way from, he was graduated from Waterloo, Indiana. I think he's a Waterloo High School graduate. Yeah. Good guy.
Yeah.
Had a good family, a lot of good kids. Don Bunge was a strategy coach. He knew the ins and outs of football, but he was also a Newt Rockne type of coach and got very emotional in locker rooms, very passionate and compassionate with his players. He'd be known to grab players once in a while that maybe you couldn't get away with today, but I tell you what, those kids responded, and they responded in a positive way. They cherished the memories with Don Bunge. Special personality, a special passion for football.
And what does it mean for the Bremen, community to have somebody like that as an institution?
Yeah, the Bremen community loves Don Bunge, and it's like the parting of the sea when he walks to a football game. Amazingly, he still sits clear at the top of the bleachers. He makes his way all the way to the top, has the same seat, and everybody likes to shake his hand. So he has a lot of visitors at every football game walking to the top of the stairs to make sure they acknowledge Don's presence.
Were you there when he decided to retire? Do you remember anything about
Yeah.
that time? Or?
Yeah, I remember when Don made the decision to retire. He was actually our athletic director at that time on a part-time basis, I believe. I think he was still teaching some classes and part-time athletic director. And he had cancer. He was diagnosed with cancer. And I think that's kind of what changed his mind. I think he could have coached more, had a longer career. I don't know if he has regrets about that, but I think in retrospect, he might wish he would have coached another decade. I don't know. But yeah, that was a sad day when he retired.
Yeah, judging by his longevity, I would say he
Mm-hmm.
did another 10 years.
Yeah.
But he taught for a few more years, right? Or did he?
Yeah, I think he taught for a few more years, I believe, after he retired from coaching. I don't remember the actual facts of that. It was interesting also the conference change that we made. Historically, Bremen High School was a member of the Northern Lakes Conference, a charter member of the Northern Lakes Conference. I think that happened in 1964. But in 1979, we were taking such a beating physically in that conference that the administration decided in 1989 to change conferences. So we went to the Northern States Conference in 1989, and then in 2015, we went from the Northern States Conference, which dissolved, and we became members of the Northern Indiana Conference, and that's where Bremen High School is right now, and the largest conference in the state of Indiana, with every class of school represented except 1A. So we have large schools like Penn, St. Joe, Elkhart Central, Mishawaka, larger schools, and we are the smallest school. But right now, we are number one in the South Division of that conference. You see there's a North and South Division. We're number one in all sports for girls and boys in that large conference. So Bremen is very competitive, and we always have been.
So what do you think it is about, the town or the community there that, you're able to, it's a smaller, obviously you're going up against the big schools like that. What's going on over there?
Bremen has a lot of pride in their school system. It's downtown Bremen, location-wise, and it is the hub of the community. Everything revolves around that school. We are also a non-consolidated school district, so we don't sit out in the middle of a cornfield somewhere. We are downtown Bremen, and Bremen kids support Bremen. The community supports the school. I don't know if we'll ever grow very much, although we are accepting in this open enrollment environment. There's a lot of kids coming from different school districts across the borders that don't live in the Bremen School District. So that's how we're growing right now. That's how we're maintaining a healthy enrollment. But I think Bremen takes great pride in the fact that we have every high school sport offered by the IHSAA. We actually have 2 students competing in gymnastics this year. And we have swimming. We have all the sports that the IHSA offers. And for a small school to have that, and in addition, still maintain good music programs, art programs, FFA programs, DECA programs, I'm pretty proud of that we keep our kids involved. When students come to our school, I emphasize 3 things to be successful. Number 1, show up every day on time. Number 2, get your work done every day on time. And number 3, get involved in something, get connected, make new friends. And so we have about 78% of our students involved in some extracurricular program at the school. That's a pretty high percentage. we try really hard to get our kids involved.
But and that the social part of school, which a lot of people don't think is as important, but it really is. You get the kids connected to the school.
When you've got athletes that are talented in music and musicians that are talented athletes, you got to somehow get them involved in both. Now, there's going to be schedule conflicts occasionally, but you just got to work through it. And that's one nice thing about Bremen. The coaches all work together, and they want multi-sport athletes. They want their athletes involved in the arts. And likewise, the band and choir teacher, the FFA sponsor, they want their kids involved in other activities. It just creates more growth opportunities for kids.
So one of the last questions I usually ask is kind of look back over at your life and your career, and since this is for the sports, the room here, just kind of talk about how sports shaped your life.
Okay.
Yeah.
Being a high school athlete, I think just getting involved, making friends, making connections, developing relationships, creating fond memories, that's what being in sports is all about. It really has nothing to do with wins and losses, it really doesn't. It's all about relationship building and hanging on to those long-lasting relationships for the rest of your life and those memories for the rest of your life. It's a game, and sometimes people lose that perspective, but the relationships is what's really important. Granted, I've had some injuries. In fact, 2 years ago I had knee replacement surgery because my knees are just worn out from all the athletics and all the sports I played. Do I have regrets? Not at all. In fact, I probably have another knee replacement here pretty soon. But would I do it all over and not play athletics? No. I'd play athletics knowing full well I'd have to have my knees replaced at some point.